She changed the locks while I was gone, just like that. No warning, no call, no explanation. I stood on my own porch, my porch, turning the key that no longer fit, listening to the quiet click of a deadbolt that answered more loudly than any words could. That lock said, "You're not welcome." That lock said, "This is no longer your home," but it was mine. God help me, it was still mine. The name's George Patterson, 62 years old, and I built this house with my own hands 35 years ago when Patricia and I were newlyweds. Never thought I'd be locked out of it by my own family. The air was colder than I expected for late April. I'd only taken a weekend trip to visit my buddy Carl Henderson down in Springfield. He'd been having a rough time since his wife passed, needed someone to talk to over a few beers, and maybe help him fix that leaky faucet he'd been putting off. And I, though I didn't admit it then, needed the break. A few nights of sleep without footsteps above me, without that sharp, citrus perfume of Madison in every hallway, without feeling like a stranger in the house I paid off 15 years ago. I'd called before I left. I'd left a note on the kitchen counter too. Back Sunday by noon. Take care. Gee, nothing dramatic. Just what a person says when he assumes he's still considered family. Still has a place at the table. Still owns the walls around him. I tried the key again. Same result. At first, I thought maybe there'd been a break-in. Maybe someone had changed the lock for safety. But then I noticed the tiny white sticker near the handle, barely visible in the morning light. Seculock Installations. Friday, 3:15 p.m. Friday, the day after I left. Not even a full 24 hours. I pressed the doorbell and waited. Nothing. Knocked, then rang again. Still nothing. My workshop in the garage, visible through the side window, looked untouched. The old Delta table saw Patricia always said was too loud. My collection of hand planes lined up on the pegboard like soldiers. The half-finished jewelry box I'd been making for Helen Rodriguez's granddaughter. All exactly where I'd left them. The dent in my mailbox from where Danny hit it with a baseball bat in 1995 was still there. The welcome mat, crooked and muddy, still read, "Home Sweet Home." Home. I took a step back, looked at the windows, curtains closed, silence inside. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no messages. I dialed Danny. It rang 4 times, then voicemail. "Danny, it's Dad. I'm back from Carl's. I can't get in. The locks have been changed. I'm sure there's some misunderstanding. Call me, please." I hung up and waited for 5 minutes, then 10. Then I called again. Still nothing. After 20 minutes in the driveway, sitting in my old F-150, hands shaking not from cold but from disbelief, I drove around the block just in case. Maybe Danny had gone out for groceries. Maybe Madison had gone to the gym she was always talking about joining. Maybe this was all a mistake. But it wasn't, because when I circled back, their car was in the driveway. The sleek black Accord I'd helped them with the down payment when Danny got laid off 2 years ago. Parked neatly on the same driveway Patricia and I poured, with our own sweat the summer after we paid off the mortgage. I got out again, knocked again, rang again. Nothing. It was then, standing there in the wind, that it hit me. Not all at once, not like a slap, but like cold water slowly creeping into your bones. This wasn't an accident. This was a decision. A boundary drawn by someone else in a house that was still legally and spiritually mine. I didn't cry. I wish I could tell you I did. That it all poured out in one clean, healing sob. But no. I stood still, let the hurt settle quietly like dust, and got back in my truck. I parked 2 blocks down. I didn't know where else to go. Carl was 2 hours away. I didn't want to explain it yet. I didn't want anyone's voice telling me, "You have to fight this," or worse. I told you they'd try something. Like this. I needed time to think. That evening, I slept in the truck, or tried to. My knees stiffened, my neck cramped, my bladder woke me at 2 a.m., and I had to find a 24-hour gas station to use the restroom. I bought a coffee I didn't want just to not feel like a loiterer. The cashier, a kid no older than Danny would have been 20 years ago, smiled kindly. I nearly lost it right there just because someone saw me as a human being. By 6 a.m., I was parked again near the house. The sky was bruised pink and orange. Dew clung to the grass, and then the lights inside turned on. I watched through the windshield as Madison stepped out onto the porch in a silk robe, sipping from the mug I got her last Christmas. The one that said, "World's Best Daughter-in-Law." She glanced at the lawn, then back at the door, and disappeared inside. She looked satisfied, comfortable, like a woman who'd just solved a problem. That was all I needed to see. Not rage, not even sadness. Just clarity, cold and sharp, as the morning air. I drove away without touching my phone, but I knew exactly what I was going to do. The house had never been big. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, ranch style, with a 2-car garage I'd converted into my workshop. We bought it in 1988, Patricia and I, with barely enough for a down payment and a toddler on my hip. It had avocado green appliances and rust stains in the tub, but the backyard faced west and the oak tree in the front yard turned gold every fall. That was enough for us, more than enough. Patricia died on that couch. I don't mean that poetically. She died there on a Tuesday evening during her favorite game show, Wheel of Fortune, the remote still in her lap, Vanna White still turning letters on the screen. I came in from the garage with sawdust on my hands and a question about dinner. By the time I noticed something was wrong, it was already too late. That was 8 years ago, the longest 8 years of my life. I've lived alone since, not because I wanted to, but because that's how it worked out. At first I expected Danny would check in more. He did for a while, dinners every few weeks, sometimes with that eager tone in his voice like he'd remembered something important. We'd sit at the kitchen table, and he'd ask about my latest woodworking project, flip through Patricia's old recipe cards, talk about maybe finishing the basement someday. Those were good times, brief but good. Then came his marriage to Madison 3 years ago, the corporate layoffs that seemed to hit every insurance company in the state, the gradual shift in tone. The calls got shorter, the visits got rarer, the excuses got more creative. Madison worked in digital marketing, which seemed to involve a lot of laptops and telling people how to make themselves look more successful online. She had strong opinions about everything, the best coffee shops, the right workout routines, why traditional marketing was dead. She didn't like the house. That much was clear from the beginning. Said the kitchen was dated, said the floors creaked like an old ship, said the place smelled like old man cologne and sawdust. She meant me. The first few years, they lived in a modern apartment downtown, all granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Clean lines, she called it. Minimalist. But when Danny's company downsized and Madison's freelance contracts dried up faster than puddles in August, they needed what she called a temporary solution. That was the phrase Danny used when he called. Just until we figure out our next move, Dad. A few weeks, maybe a couple months. I hesitated. I did. The house had been quiet for so long, just me and the sound of my tools in the garage, the evening news, Patricia's old wind chimes on the back porch. But then he said, it would really help us out, and that was all it took. He could have asked me to sleep on nails, and I'd have gotten the hammer ready. They moved in on a Sunday in late September, 4 suitcases, 2 laptop bags, a 65-inch flat, screen that made my old TV look like a calculator, and enough exercise equipment to outfit a small gym. Madison didn't speak to me much that first day. She was too busy directing Danny where to put her standing desk, where to set the box with her essential oil diffuser, which room had the best energy flow for her morning meditation. Without asking me, she moved my wedding photo from the mantel to the hall closet. I found it there that evening, face down behind a stack of her yoga mats. Later, when I mentioned it to Danny, he apologized. Sort of. She's just trying to make it feel livable, he said, scratching the back of his neck like he used to do as a kid when he knew he was in trouble. It was already livable, I said. He smiled tightly. Yeah, but, modern. Updated. That was the start. In the first week, they rearranged the living room. My recliner, the one with Patricia's reading pillow still tucked in the corner, suddenly appeared in the garage next to my workbench. Better flow, Madison explained when I asked. In the second week, they replaced my coffee maker with some fancy machine that sounded like a jet engine and required special pods that cost more per cup than I used to spend on a whole can of Folgers. By the third week, I no longer kept regular coffee in the kitchen because Madison was trying to reduce caffeine and said the smell bothered her morning routine. I began to feel like a tenant in my own house. No, not even a tenant. A guest who'd overstayed his welcome and was too polite to leave. She called me George, not Dad, not even Mr. Patterson, just George, like I was the neighbor who let his dog bark too long or forgot to bring in his trash cans. When I brought it up to Danny, he waved it off. She's not big on formality, Dad. You know how young people are these days. "It's not formality," I said. "It's family." But the truth was, I'd let them stay. I'd made space. I'd cooked meals they picked at, claiming they were too heavy or not, aligned with their wellness goals. I'd cleaned up after them, turned down the thermostat because Madison got migraines from dry heat, stopped using my table saw in the evenings because she needed quiet time for her online yoga videos. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would bring Danny closer, that we'd find a rhythm, like roommates who actually liked each other. Instead, I just found myself tiptoeing from room to room, carrying my quiet like a tray I was scared to drop. I remember the night I overheard them talking in the kitchen. I'd been in the garage, sanding the jewelry box for Helen's granddaughter, when I came in for a glass of water. "He keeps leaving sawdust on his clothes," Madison whispered. "It gets everywhere. It's like living with a construction site." "He's used to his own way," Danny mumbled back. "The workshop is his thing. It's cluttered. It's bad energy. And that smell from the stain and varnish, it gives me headaches. He's trying to be considerate. He only works out there during the day now." Well, trying's not enough. This is supposed to be temporary, remember? We need to start looking at our options. I stood on the other side of the wall, sawdust still under my fingernails, my own words swallowed back like bad medicine. Options, like I was a problem to be solved instead of the man who'd raised the boys she married. I didn't sleep much after that, but still, I stayed. I thought it was temporary, that soon they'd find their next apartment, move on, thank me for my help. And I'd get my home back. The one where I could watch my shows without headphones and leave my newspaper on the kitchen table without someone folding it and putting it in a basket labeled reading materials. But time passed. October became November. November became December. Nothing changed except the temperature and Madison's growing list of improvements the house needed. The kitchen needed updating. The bathroom needed modern fixtures. The garage workshop was taking up valuable space that could be converted into a home office or yoga studio. And then came Carl's call in April. His wife had passed the previous fall, and he'd been struggling. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, spent most days staring at old photos and wondering what he was supposed to do with the rest of his time. "Would you come for a few days?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I could use the company. Maybe you could help me figure out this insurance paperwork Sarah always handled." I looked at the calendar on my kitchen wall, the one Patricia used to mark doctor appointments and Danny's school events in her careful handwriting. I looked at the guest towels Madison had replaced with better ones that nobody was allowed to actually use. I looked at the way my favorite coffee mug had been relegated to the back of the cabinet behind her collection of herbal teas. "Of course," I said. "I'll drive down Friday morning." I left at 9 a.m. sharp, after making sure the house was tidy and there. It was food in the refrigerator. I even left a note with Carl's phone number, just in case. "Back Sunday by noon. Take care. G. Simple, clear, no drama." Carl's place was a mess. Not dirty, just lost. Like a man who'd forgotten how to live for himself. We spent Friday sorting through insurance papers and bank statements. Saturday, we fixed his leaky kitchen faucet and organized his workshop. He had good tools, but hadn't touched them since Sarah died. We talked about our wives, about getting older, about how quiet houses get when the people who filled them with laughter are gone. Saturday evening, we sat on his back porch with a couple of beers, watching the sun set behind his neighbor's barn. "You're lucky, George," he said, having Danny close by, having family. I almost laughed, almost told him about the eggshells I walked on, about how I'd become a stranger in my own house. But I didn't. Carl had enough problems without hearing mine. Sunday morning, I helped him install a new shower head he'd been putting off, had one more cup of coffee, and hit the road. The drive back was peaceful. Spring was finally showing up, trees budding, daffodils poking through the mulch, that clean smell in the air that makes you think about starting over. I pulled into my driveway at 11:47 a.m., 13 minutes early. Their car was there, Danny's Accord parked in its usual spot. Everything looked normal from the outside. The grass needed cutting, but that could wait until afternoon. I grabbed my overnight bag from the passenger seat and walked up to the front door, already thinking about lunch and maybe getting some work done on Helen's jewelry box. That's when I discovered what they'd done. The key didn't fit, not even close. I tried it again, thinking maybe I was tired from the drive, maybe I wasn't paying attention. But no. The lock was different, newer, shinier, wrong. For a moment, I just stood there, key in hand, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I noticed the Sticker, Seculock Installations, Friday, 3:15 p.m., the day I left. They hadn't wasted any time. I pressed the doorbell. Nothing. Knocked, then rang again. Still nothing, but I could hear them in there. The TV was on, some cooking show Madison liked to watch. I could hear her laugh at something, that sharp sound that always reminded me of breaking glass. I walked around the house, checking windows, looking for any sign they might acknowledge me. The curtains were drawn tight. In the back, I could see through the kitchen window. Danny was making coffee with that expensive machine. Madison was at the table with her laptop, probably working on one of her social media campaigns. Neither of them looked up when I tapped on the glass. I stood in my own backyard, looking at my own house, and felt something I'd never felt before. Not anger, not sadness, but something colder. Recognition. This wasn't a mistake or a miscommunication. This was a decision, a calculated move to remove me from my own life. I tried calling Danny, straight to voicemail. "Danny, it's Dad. I'm back from Carl's. I can't get in. The locks have been changed. I'm sure there's some misunderstanding. Call me, please." I waited 5 minutes, then 10. Then I called again. Still nothing. That's when I saw Madison through the kitchen window, phone in hand, looking right at me. She said something to Danny, pointed in my direction. He glanced over, then deliberately turned away. She smiled and went back to her laptop. They knew I was out there. They knew I couldn't get in. And they didn't care. That's when the cold recognition became something else. Something sharper. Something that would cost them more than they bargained for. The locksmith's name was Lenny Foster, and he used to fix our screen doors back when Danny was in Little League. Short man, always wore a Cardinals cap and smelled like cigarettes even after he quit. Patricia liked him, said he charged fair and never asked unnecessary questions. That's exactly what I needed. I found his number in my old address book, the one Patricia kept in the kitchen drawer with the good pens and spare batteries. I didn't think he still worked. I certainly didn't expect him to pick up at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning, but he did. Foster Locks. "Hi, it's George Patterson. You used to work on our place on Maple Street. Fixed our back door about 10 years ago." Silence, then a warm chuckle. "Well, I'll be. How's Patricia? Gone 8 years now." He went quiet a moment. "Sorry to hear that. She was a good one. Made the best iced tea in the neighborhood. She did. Listen, Lenny, I need locks changed." He didn't ask why, just asked when. "Today," I said. "Early. Before 8 a.m., if possible. I'll be there at 7 sharp." I gave him the address. I didn't say my house. I didn't have to. I parked 3 blocks away and walked up just before 7. The morning air was crisp, clean. My knees ached like they always did when the weather changed. But I stood tall. This was my property, my home, my life. Time to remember that. Lenny was already waiting by the porch, toolbox in hand, looking at the shiny new lock like he was studying a puzzle. "Looks different," he said. "Not your style." "It's not," I replied. He didn't smile, just went to work. I stood beside him, arms crossed, as he removed the sleek modern hardware, clean, soulless, like everything Madison touched, and replaced it with a brass deadbolt that clicked with weight and history. When he was done, he handed me 2 new keys. "You want a third?" "No, 2's enough." He packed up his tools, then looked at me with something between curiosity and respect. "You all right, George?" I met his eyes. "I am now." At 7:32 a.m., I opened the front door to my own house and stepped inside. It smelled different. Lavender detergent, something floral and expensive. My family photos were still missing from the mantel. Patricia's Afghan was folded neatly on the armchair, as if it had been placed there just for decoration. Not for warmth, but the floor still creaked under my step. The clock above the fridge still ticked half a beat too slow. The morning sun still lit the east wall of the kitchen like a quiet promise. I went into the master bedroom. They'd changed everything. My quilt was gone, replaced with something white and sterile. My blinds were gone, replaced with blackout curtains. A diffuser sat on Patricia's nightstand, puffing out lavender mist. I unplugged it. Then I went to the closet. My clothes were boxed, labeled seasonal, garage. I carried each box back to the bedroom. It took an hour to set things back as they were. Not perfectly, just enough to reclaim what was mine. Then I turned to the guest room. Madison's shoes lined the baseboard like expensive soldiers. Her suitcases, leather with gold hardware, sat at the foot of the bed. Her silk robe hung on the door like a flag of conquest. One by one, I carried everything out to the lawn. Not thrown, not dumped, placed carefully, folded, where needed, lined up neatly along the edge of the porch like items at a yard sale. Her yoga equipment, her essential oils, her collection of self-help books about manifesting abundance. All of it sitting in the morning dew. By the time I finished, the sun was higher in the sky. Mrs. Wilson from next door was walking her dog. She slowed, eyebrows raised, then waved. I waved back. I went inside and brewed coffee. My coffee from the can I'd hidden behind the cereal boxes. I sat in the kitchen, steam rising from Patricia's favorite mug, and waited. At 9:11 a.m., the doorknob rattled. Then came the knock, sharp, impatient. "George!" Madison's voice was high, strained. "There's something wrong with the lock." I sipped my coffee. More knocking, harder now. "George, open the door! Why are my things on the lawn?" I didn't move. Then came the voice I'd once lived for. "Dad! Dad, are you inside?" I stood, walked to the door, and opened it. Danny's face was pale. Madison's was red with embarrassment and rage. I looked at them both, then down at the bags. "They're not on the lawn," I said quietly. "They're on my lawn." "George," Madison started, "this is completely uncalled for." I looked at her, long and steady. "So is changing the locks on someone else's house." "It was a misunderstanding," Danny said quickly. "No," I said, "it wasn't." He stopped, looked at me like he was seeing something new. "You locked me out of my home," I said. "You didn't call. You didn't warn me. You left me to sleep in my truck like a homeless man." Silence. "And you," I added, turning to Madison, "planned it while I was packing to help a friend." "I didn't think you'd make such a scene," she muttered. "I'm not making a scene," I replied. "I'm setting a boundary." Danny reached for the doorknob. I stepped aside, but didn't move from the frame. "You can come in to collect anything else you need," I said, "but you don't live here anymore." He stared at me. "You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life." The next hour passed in awkward silence and rustling suitcases. They packed quickly, efficiently, like people who'd been caught at something and wanted to escape before the consequences got worse. When they were done, Danny lingered on the threshold. "This isn't how families treat each other," he said. I looked at him for a long time. "No," I said softly. "It's not. You taught me that." I closed the door, not slammed, not locked in anger, just closed. That afternoon, I called my attorney, Susan Miller, updated my will, established a trust, made sure my house would stay protected. Then I called Carl. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Better than expected," I said. "Sometimes you have to lose something to remember what it's worth." 3 months later, Danny called. We talked, carefully, like two people learning a new language. He'd left Madison, was getting his life back together, wanted to try again with proper boundaries this time. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but I sleep. Well now, in my own bed, in my own house, with my own rules. And that's enough. You don't owe anyone your erasure, not your children, not their partners, not the world that keeps asking you to shrink to make room for people who never learned to appreciate the space you already gave them. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on tighter. It's teaching people that your respect isn't negotiable, even when it costs you the relationship you thought you wanted to save.